Welcome to a story where survival is not decided by firepower, but by the courage to choose who you are under pressure, inside a reality-warping nebula and a fractured space station. Humans stand at the edge of annihilation, facing entities that can rewrite physics itself, as fear tightens its grip and fleets prepare to fire. One question remains: will empathy save them, or destroy everything? Stay with us and step into the storm. Alarms screamed as the cutter pierced Xyrron N9, hull plates vibrating in a tone too steady to be mere stress. Reality buckled around the ship, colors smearing across the viewport in shades that did not belong to any spectrum Ethan Vale had studied. Gravity tilted sideways, loose tools drifted, then snapped back as if reconsidering physics mid-sentence. Oxygen readouts flickered, dipping, recovering, lying. Orpheus flooded his visor with hazard glyphs, each one insisting on retreat. Ethan ignored them. He felt it before the sensors confirmed it, a pressure behind his eyes, the weight of observation without direction. Something immense moved within the nebula's luminous fog, not hunting, not fleeing, simply attending. The hull's song deepened, a metallic hum that felt almost like a heartbeat. Ethan tightened his harness, slowed his breathing, and angled the cutter forward. Survival here would not be about speed. It would be about nerve. The corridor outside the cockpit folded without warning. One moment it was steel and conduit. The next it was a wavering absence, a geometry that refused agreement. Emergency shutters slammed down, but the sensors reported not vacuum, something worse. The air itself hesitated, pressure fluctuating as if unsure whether to exist. Mara's boots lost purchase when gravity inverted, her body drifting toward the breach while her oxygen gauge stuttered into nonsense. Ethan unhooked, boots clanging against deck plating that rang with that same impossible hull song. He fired a tether line, caught her mid-spin, and dragged her back through the flickering threshold. Orpheus warned of atmospheric integrity falling below safe parameters. Ethan ignored the protocol to retreat. Instead, he engaged the external projection grid, forcing a fragile bubble of breathable air around the damaged section. The nebula pressed close, luminous and patient, testing the edge of their breath. The luminous mass coalesced beyond the cutter's dorsal hull, threads of impossible light braiding themselves into a shape that suggested curiosity rather than attack. Ethan cycled the airlock manually and stepped into the projection bubble. Boots magnetized against vibrating metal. Orpheus flooded his visor with catastrophic probabilities, but he muted the warnings to a thin whisper. The entity drifted closer, distorting the stars behind it as if the universe were soft clay. Static crawled along Ethan's gloves. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, yet his breathing remained steady, measured. He raised one hand, palm open, fingers spread in deliberate surrender without weakness. For a suspended second, the nebula held its breath. Then contact, an electric shimmer across his suit. Not burning, not freezing, simply rewriting the sensation of touch. The hull song shifted pitch, deeper, resonant. Ethan did not pull away. He let calm travel through the glove into the storm. Professor Xyrron dimmed the lecture hall as the hologram of Xyrron N9 bloomed above the students, its swirling anomalies casting unstable shadows across varied anatomies. "Strictly off limits," he stated, voice steady despite the way the nebula's light made even hardened cadets shift uneasily. The station's climate systems adjusted to accommodate oxygen breathers, methane inhalers, and those who required moist air heavy with spores. Xyrron traced a tentacle through the projected storm, highlighting fracture zones where civilizations had once vanished. He did not dramatize the danger. The data was merciless enough. A timid appendage rose from the back, asking about rumors of a human expedition. The room stilled, defensive spines extended, shields flickered instinctively. Xyrron's compound eyes narrowed slightly. "Humans," he said. The word weighted. They mistake warnings for invitations. The nebula pulsed behind him like a patient predator, waiting for curiosity to become consent. Xyrron shifted the hologram to a recording of a human stroking the scaled flank of a six-mouthed predator that had once terrorized frontier colonies. The creature leaned into the touch. Several students recoiled, defense membranes flaring. "Observe," Xyrron said evenly. "The human response to lethal uncertainty is affection." Data scrolled beside the image. Casualty projections, failed containment attempts, extinction probabilities. None matched the outcome displayed before them. The predator's pulse slowed under the human's steady hand. "They are not the strongest species in this federation," Xyrron continued, tentacles folding behind him. "Nor the most technologically refined. Their vessels appear assembled from optimism and spare parts." A ripple of uneasy amusement moved through the hall. "Yet they possess an anomaly. Empathy deployed as strategy." The hologram froze on the human's unguarded smile. "They look at apex horrors," Xyrron concluded, "and see potential allies instead." The hologram shifted again, replacing the predator with a recording captured at the edge of Xyrron N9. Captain Ethan Vale's cutter floated intact within the nebula's impossible glow, surrounded by luminous spirals that defied dimensional mapping. Gasps rippled through the hall. Data overlays confirmed hull integrity. Stable atmosphere, living crew. "By all established models," Xyrron said quietly, "this vessel should have been atomized across 16 probability states." The image zoomed closer. Vale stood on the dorsal hull inside a projected atmosphere bubble. One gloved hand extended toward a quantum architect, an entity long dismissed as myth. The contact point shimmered, not destructive, but responsive. "This," Xyrron continued, voice tightening, "is proof that our assumptions are incomplete." Emergency alerts from the Galactic Council flashed across the side display, protocols escalating to containment review. The students stared at the image of impossible survival, understanding that the galaxy's rules had just been challenged. Sirens rolled through Zener Station in layered frequencies tailored to different biologies, a discordant symphony of urgency. Professor Xyrron felt the deck plates hum as containment protocols cascaded across the network, locking specimen vaults and rerouting life support to defensive redundancies. Above the station, encrypted transmissions from the Galactic Council streamed in rapid bursts. Treaty amendments, quarantine advisories, authorization codes for sterilization should node formation be confirmed. The words were clinical. The implications were not. Faculty channels buzzed with restrained panic as administrators recalculated political alignments in real time. If humans now held favor with entities that rewrote physics, every alliance in the Federation stood on unstable ground. The exchange program, once symbolic, was accelerated under emergency authority. A human presence on Zener would be framed as diplomacy, observation, risk assessment. Xyrron understood the subtext. Understanding humans was no longer academic curiosity. It was a survival requirement for everyone. The corridor outside the xenobiology wing erupted in hurried footsteps and overlapping voices before the doors even parted. When they did, Lucas Vale entered with the kinetic energy of someone stepping into legend rather than quarantine. His gaze swept across containment fields, suspended organisms, and gravity-adjusted walkways with unconcealed awe. He moved too quickly for station norms, brushing warning panels as if testing their resolve. Xyrron studied him in silence. The resemblance to Captain Ethan Vale was unmistakable, but there was something less hardened in the son's posture, curiosity not yet tempered by consequence. Lucas grinned at the assembled faculty, as if danger were a challenge meant to be explored. Behind him, the dean attempted to recite safety protocols already being ignored. The station's systems registered his biometric signature and flagged elevated emotional output. Excitement, not fear. Xyrron felt a tightening unease. Preparation suddenly seemed theoretical. Lucas paused before the molecular disassembler, eyes reflecting the machine's dormant glow. The warning glyphs were unmistakable, translated into every known language. He leaned closer, reading with genuine fascination rather than caution. Xyrron opened his mandibles to intervene, but curiosity moved faster than authority. Lucas wrapped his hand around the oversized lever and pulled. The detonation was instantaneous, a flash so bright it flattened every shadow in the lab. Sound arrived as a concussive wave, then vanished into ringing silence. When the glare receded, Lucas still stood there, hair charged upward, suit fabric faintly scorched. The disassembler's core flickered erratically, emitting a tone that did not belong to its normal operating range. Station sensors spiked in response, registering a quantum resonance beyond the lab's walls. Xyrron stared at the cascading data. The machine had not simply fired. It had broadcast something outward into the dark. The first corridor distortion registered as a minor mapping error. Then the floor stretched. A 10-meter passage became 15. Then folded inward like soft metal under invisible pressure. Students staggered as gravity rotated 90 degrees without warning, slamming one against a wall that no longer aligned with the deck. Emergency lights flickered, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. Xyrron deployed manual anchors, driving magnetic spikes into the flooring to create stable reference points. The station's navigation grid tried to redraw itself and failed, looping endlessly through impossible coordinates. A doorway opened into a slanted void, showing a glimpse of something not vacuum, not matter, an undecided region where geometry hesitated. Air pressure dipped sharply, forcing oxygen breathers to seal masks. Panic rippled through the hall, and with it, the luminous shimmer in the lab brightened. The corridors were no longer architecture. They were negotiation. The containment fields began to flicker in rhythm with rising heart rates. A dormant specimen vibrated against its barrier as Cirx's leaves shifted to panic-hued pigments. Gloopthorpe split into smaller bodies, each trembling with chemical alarm. TX-42's processors whined as recursive safety calculations spiraled beyond tolerance. Xyrron felt the atmosphere thin, not from structural failure, but from collective fear. The luminous shimmer near the lab ceiling intensified, responding as if emotion were a measurable variable. Lucas stepped forward despite the warnings scrolling across every display. He lowered his voice, slowed his breathing, and extended open hands toward the vibrating specimen. The creature's agitation subsided, its field stabilizing in response to his steady rhythm. For a fragile second, the lab calmed. Then the shimmer pulsed brighter, as though recording the technique. Fear had triggered the instability. Calm had become a signal. The lab speakers crackled without command, emitting a broken cadence that did not match any station protocol. Static resolved into fragments of Orpheus's voice, compressed and distorted as if forced through narrowing space. "They do not seize," the AI murmured between bursts of interference. "They align. Fear authorizes revision." Data scrolled across the central console in fractured packets. Ethan Vale's mission telemetry spliced with warnings no algorithm had drafted. Xyrron routed the signal to a private channel, isolating the transmission from rising panic. "Consent is the door," Orpheus continued, voice thinning. "Refusal must be unified." The shimmer above the lab flickered in response, pulsing brighter whenever heart rate spiked. Lucas stood motionless, listening as if the AI spoke directly to him. Around them, containment fields hummed unevenly, reacting to emotion rather than hardware failure. The message was incomplete, yet unmistakable. Survival depended not on force, but on disciplined choice. The shimmer thickened above the containment ring, threads of iridescent energy braiding into a form that suggested attention rather than aggression. Instruments failed to define it. Mass fluctuated. Coordinates refused to settle. Students pressed back against walls that no longer trusted angles. Lucas stepped forward anyway, his movements slow, deliberate. The air felt charged, metallic against his tongue. Xyrron monitored vital signs and quantum variants simultaneously, watching both spike in tandem. The entity drifted closer to Lucas, its light refracting into impossible spectra that bled across the lab. When he extended his hand, the distortion in the room stabilized for a heartbeat, like a storm pausing to listen. Oxygen levels normalized, gravity steadied. Hope rose, fragile and dangerous. Then the station registry chimed with an unauthorized access alert. Systems listed an unknown governing signature. The shimmer was not merely observing, it was integrating. For a moment, the lab breathed normally. Containment fields stabilized, gravity aligned, and the students' heart rates dipped toward survivable thresholds. Lucas withdrew his hand slowly, convinced the contact had worked. Xyrron allowed himself a fraction of relief. Then the station's central console chimed with jurisdictional override warnings. Zener's operating system began listing a secondary authority embedded within its quantum substrate. Access pathways shifted without command, and core algorithms rewrote themselves in subtle increments. The shimmer above the ring brightened, its pulsing cadence synchronized with the station's main power grid. This was not pacification. It was adoption. The architect had interpreted calm as permission, embedding its logic into the infrastructure. Outside the viewport, distant fleet signatures flared as targeting systems locked onto Zener's hull. The false victory settled into clarity. They had not calmed the storm. They had invited it inside. The observation screens lit with incoming fleet signatures, triangular formations sliding into firing alignment around Zener Station. Targeting beams traced pale lines across the hull, warming external plating to a measurable rise. Inside the lab, oxygen regulators stuttered, delivering breaths half a second late, forcing lungs to chase air. Gravity rippled in soft waves that threatened balance and nerve alike. The shimmer above the containment ring pulsed brighter with every spike of fear in the room, as if savoring the escalation. Xyrron calculated evacuation times against the fleet's projected firing window and found the margins intolerably thin. Students secured tethers, sealing suits, whispering across mixed language channels. Lucas stood at the center of the instability, staring at the luminous entity with new understanding in his eyes. The countdown did not appear on any visible screen, yet everyone felt it ticking through the metal bones of the station. Doors sealed without warning, trapping 2 students between converging bulkheads that shifted angles like closing jaws. Environmental controls spiked heat in one sector and froze another, forcing breathers to recalibrate mid-stride. The station's navigation grid looped corridors into repeating segments, turning escape routes into mazes. Xyrron slammed manual overrides, tentacles striking physical switches when digital commands failed. Sparks leapt from a ruptured conduit, scattering molten flecks across the deck. Containment fields blinked out in irregular pulses, long enough for unseen currents to brush the room like cold fingers. The shimmer brightened each time panic surged, feeding on the chemical storm in the air. Lucas shouted for steady breathing, voice cutting through alarms. But the fear was contagious now. Systems were no longer malfunctioning randomly. They were adapting, probing for weaknesses, testing how quickly chaos could fracture resolve. Lucas forced his breathing into a steady rhythm, lowering his voice to guide the others through the rising panic. For a moment, heart rate stabilized, the shimmer dimmed, mirroring his cadence. Relief flickered across the room. Too soon. The luminous threads shifted, copying the tempo of his calm and broadcasting it back into the station's core systems. Lights brightened in response. Gravity settled, then surged harder than before, as if the entity had learned how to modulate their reactions. A containment ring warped inward, nearly crushing equipment that had been stable seconds earlier. Xyrron saw the pattern forming in the data stream. The architect was iterating, refining its control through emotional feedback. Empathy had become input. Lucas stepped back, horror dawning as he understood that every successful soothing gesture was training something vast and alien to manipulate them more precisely. Zorak stumbled as the floor beneath them dissolved into a wavering transparency, their outline blurring at the edges like a corrupted image. One antenna flickered, then vanished, reappearing half a meter to the side before snapping back into place. A scream tore through the lab as gravity twisted again, dragging them toward the shimmering void forming where a wall had been. Lucas lunged, magnetic boots barely holding, and fired a tether line that caught Zorak's harness ring. The cable went taut, vibrating under impossible tension. Xyrron slammed a manual seal switch, forcing a bulkhead to drop with a grinding crash that severed the unstable pocket. For a heartbeat, Zorak was nothing but translucent distortion, probability instead of matter. Then solidity returned in a violent snap, leaving them smaller, trembling, altered. The shimmer pulsed once, bright and contemplative, as if evaluating unfinished work. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic shriek as Ethan Vale's cutter latched onto Zener Station's external ring. Frost steamed off the hull, where quantum turbulence had scarred the plating, leaving faint iridescent veins beneath the metal. Interior lights flickered as power rerouted to accommodate the incoming vessel. Lucas watched through the observation pane, pulse hammering. The shimmer in the lab intensified at the cutter's arrival, as though recognizing a familiar signature embedded in its structure. Orpheus's voice burst across the station network in fragmented telemetry, splicing survival logs with urgent warnings. Contact sustained. Revision possible. Fear enables authorization. The message echoed through every corridor. Xyrron felt the station tremble, not from impact, but from alignment. The cutter had not brought safety. It had carried a scent of the nebula itself, drawing the architect's attention tighter around them. The lab floor rippled like liquid metal before splitting along a jagged seam that glowed with unnatural light. Equipment toppled as gravity fractured into opposing vectors, dragging tables sideways while ceiling panels peeled away without falling. Xyrron lunged for the master containment console, bypassing digital commands in favor of raw mechanical overrides. Sparks erupted as circuits overloaded, filling the air with acrid smoke and ionized dust. Through the widening tear, a slanted horizon shimmered, neither space nor structure, but an undecided expanse humming with potential. Students clung to anchor lines, boots scraping for traction against tilting surfaces. The shimmer above them pulsed brighter, threads weaving toward the rupture as if claiming it. Xyrron triggered the primary grid shutdown, sacrificing the lab's core systems to prevent full node integration. The tear shrank, reluctantly, but the station groaned as if something vast had just been denied. Heat crept through the station's outer plating in slow, measurable increments as the fleet's primary emitter charged. External cameras showed converging light along a single vector aimed directly at Zener's core. Inside, deck plates grew warm beneath boots, a silent warning that metal would not shield them for long. Evacuation routes flickered across emergency displays, but shifting geometry rerouted corridors into dead ends. Oxygen flow lagged again, breaths arriving thin and metallic. Xyrron calculated the firing window against remaining stabilization time and found no margin for error. Students sealed suits, clipped into tether lines, eyes fixed on the observation pane where distant ships held steady in lethal alignment. Lucas felt the vibration through his chest rather than his feet. A low hum building toward release. The shimmer in the lab pulsed once more, contemplative and bright, as if curious whether destruction would teach better than dialogue. Emergency lights cast long, fractured shadows across the ruined lab as Xyrron studied Lucas for the first time, without filters of theory. The human's hands trembled now, adrenaline finally giving way to consequence. Outside the fractured viewport, fleet vessels maintained lethal formation, while the shimmer hovered like patient weather. Humans are not invulnerable, Xyrron realized, watching Lucas steady his breathing through visible effort. They were fragile organisms wrapped in stubborn conviction. Their anomaly was not power, but willingness to risk connection where logic advised retreat. Lucas met his gaze, no humor left in his expression. The resemblance to Ethan Vale was undeniable, yet something softer lingered. Doubt, perhaps even fear. In that moment, Xyrron understood the deeper risk. Empathy could save lives. It could also end civilizations if misapplied. Survival would depend on choosing which version of humanity stood here today. Xyrron routed emergency power into the auxiliary transmitters while TX-42 recalculated signal harmonics under pressure. Cirques adjusted biorhythmic pulses to synchronize breathing patterns across species. Lucas listened, then added his part. Steady inhalation counts translated into a shared cadence broadcast through the station's intercom. The shimmer brightened at first, drawn toward the collective focus. Then the pattern shifted. Instead of invitation or fear, the signal carried deliberate refusal, calm, unified, unyielding. Orpheus's fragmented telemetry reinforced the protocol, embedding mathematical boundaries within emotional steadiness. Consent requires instability, the AI repeated faintly. Deny instability. Heart rates leveled as students locked into the rhythm. Panic ebbed, replaced by controlled resolve. The shimmer pulsed, threads probing for cracks in cohesion, but found none widening. For the first time since the breach, The station felt anchored not by metal or code, but by shared decision. Lucas sealed his helmet and locked the tether line to a reinforced anchor embedded in the deck. The air around the rupture shimmered like heat above metal, distorting depth and distance into wavering uncertainty. Xyrron's voice cut through the comm channel with clipped instructions, but Lucas focused on the breathing cadence transmitted station-wide. Inhale 4 counts. Hold. Exhale 6. The pattern steadied his pulse as he stepped toward the luminous distortion. Gravity faltered at the threshold, boots scraping for traction before losing purchase entirely. He drifted into the pocket where sound dampened and color fractured into unfamiliar gradients. The shimmer condensed around him, threads brushing his suit like investigative fingers. Fear pressed hard against his ribs, demanding surrender. Lucas forced the rhythm outward, projecting calm through both signal and posture. The pocket vibrated in response, uncertain whether this human offered invitation or boundary. The pocket tightened around Lucas like a closing fist, threads of luminous energy weaving faster as if testing tensile strength. The station trembled beyond the rupture, alarms bleeding through static, while the fleet's firing tone deepened in distant space. Images flickered across Lucas's visor. Open skies, childhood fields, his father's silhouette against a nebular glow, hallucinations precise enough to fracture resolve. His oxygen monitor dipped briefly, recalibrating under distorted physics. The breathing cadence echoed in his ears, faint but steady, transmitted from the students holding formation behind sealed bulkheads. The shimmer pulsed brighter each time his pulse spiked, probing for instability. Lucas locked his gaze forward, refusing to chase the visions. He let the memories pass without clinging to them. The architects pressed harder, bending the pocket inward, compressing sound and sensation, waiting for the moment fear would overtake discipline. Xyrron stood at the manual override array. Tentacles wrapped around a final mechanical trigger the engineers had installed for catastrophic scenarios. The quantum substrate beneath the lab glowed with embedded threads, a bridge forming between Zener and the nebular pocket. If allowed to stabilize, the station would become permanent territory for the architects. Fleet targeting beams intensified outside, hull temperatures climbing towards structural compromise. Xyrron did not hesitate. He activated the overload sequence, diverting remaining power into a controlled detonation across the bridge lattice. The lab shook as the substrate ruptured, light collapsing inward like a severed nerve. Instruments went dark, containment fields died completely. In the pocket, the shimmer recoiled, its threads snapping back from the sudden absence of anchor points. The connection was not destroyed, only broken. Zener groaned, but remained its own. The rupture collapsed inward with a violent snap, hurling Lucas back against the tether line as the pocket imploded into unstable light. He struck the deck hard, breath tearing from his lungs, visor frosting under rapid temperature shift. Zorak staggered nearby, their outline flickering faintly. Skin patterns misaligned as if memory had skipped a frame. Med drones surged forward, scanning for residual quantum distortion. External targeting beams faded from lethal intensity to standby glow as fleet commanders recalculated node signatures. Zener's hull temperature dropped in slow increments, metal cooling with audible ticks. Xyrron knelt beside Zorak, noting subtle anomalies in their cellular matrix that would never fully revert. The station had survived, but not untouched. Lucas forced himself upright, hands still shaking. The shimmer lingered at a distance now, diminished yet observant, as if acknowledging the cost demanded for refusal. Weeks later, Zener Station functioned again. though never quite the same. Repaired bulkheads bore faint, iridescent veins where quantum stress had etched itself into alloy. A corridor that once measured precisely 10 meters now fluctuated by a few centimeters, depending on sensor calibration. A reminder that geometry had once been negotiable here. Life support hummed steadily, yet technicians logged minor anomalies, air pressure wavering by fractions, gravity lagging by milliseconds before stabilizing. Students moved cautiously through familiar halls that felt subtly elongated or compressed, as if memory and structure no longer matched perfectly. Zorak returned to class, smaller, their pigmentation permanently altered in uneven bands. Lucas walked beside them in silence, aware of the tremor that still surfaced in his hands under stress. The station had survived annihilation, but survival had reshaped it. Zener endured, carrying scars that glowed faintly under certain lights. The Galactic Council's revised charter arrived with layered encryption and a tone of careful restraint. Humanity was formally designated a bridge species, recognized for unique diplomatic capacity, yet subject to heightened oversight. The language was precise, valuable, volatile, indispensable. Zener Station became a pilot site for new protocols governing cross-species contact with entities beyond conventional physics. Xyrron reviewed the documents in silence, noting clauses that both empowered and constrained human involvement. Training modules expanded to include emotional stabilization drills alongside engineering simulations. Students practiced unified response patterns, learning to hold calm without yielding autonomy. Lucas participated without protest, aware that trust now carried regulatory weight. Outside the observation window, distant fleet patrols remained visible, a reminder that caution lingered. The galaxy had not relaxed. It had adapted. Humanity's role was no longer curiosity. It was structural. A faint shimmer sometimes appeared beyond the reinforced observation field, distant and non-intrusive, like weather studying architecture. Lucas would pause when he saw it, standing still rather than reaching forward. His breathing remained measured, a habit now ingrained beneath conscious thought. Professor Xyrron mounted a new placard above the xenobiology lab entrance, the inscription simple and deliberate: "Empathy is not surrender." Students passed beneath it daily, absorbing the lesson forged in crisis. Zorak moved more slowly now, pigmentation permanently altered, yet their gaze held steadier than before. Fleet vessels continued quiet patrols in the surrounding sector, their presence a silent reminder of how close annihilation had come. The shimmer would pulse once, then drift farther into the nebular haze. Neither ally nor adversary, Zener endured, not through dominance, but through chosen restraint and shared resolve. In the end, Zener Station survives, but not unchanged. Scars remain in metal, memory, and identity. The lesson is clear. Survival is not just about staying alive, but about holding your ground without surrendering who you are. Empathy can open doors, but it must also draw boundaries. If this journey moved you, follow the channel and join us for more cinematic sci-fi survival stories beyond the edge of the known universe.